Okay, welcome to Writers on Writing. I'm your host, Dr. Brenda Green, founder and executive director of the Center for Black Literature at Medgar Evers College and director of the National Black Writers Conference. Writers on Writers comes to you every Sunday evening and gives you, our listening audience, an opportunity to hear writers from the African diaspora talk about their work, their craft, and their lives. I'm very pleased to have on the telephone with me this evening, Lady Hubbard. Welcome, Lady Hubbard.
Oh,
Lady.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Yes, it's really nice to be able to talk to you from New Orleans.
Yeah.
Okay, so just to share with our audience, Lady Hubbard is the author of The Talented Ripkns. It's an award-winning book which received the 2018 Ernest J. Gaines Award for Literary Excellence. And her writing has appeared in Guernica, the Times Literary Supplement, the Arkansas International, Copper, Nickel, and Callaloo, among many other venues. She's participated in many writers' workshops and colonies, and looks like you're doing this full time. Is there something else you'd like to share with us? Are you doing this full time?
You mean writing?
Yes.
Well, currently, I am as full. Yes, full time. I have 3 children also. So I feel like I have 2 full-time jobs. So, but yeah.
How old are your children?
6, 13, and 18.
Oh, okay. Oh, really nicely spread out.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's a lot of work as well.
Okay. So tell us more about your writing life. I'm sorry I interrupted you. You were saying you're doing this full time. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your writing life.
Well, currently I try to write every day. I'm working on another novel and also a collection of short stories, and I try to write. I do write every single day, which is really nice. It's sort of strange to call myself a full-time writer because it's not something I always have the opportunity to do or be. But right now I do. So I just wake up and write, and then I take care of my kids, and then I try to write some more.
Okay. And when did you start writing?
I've always written. I didn't start publishing or trying to publish my work until, I don't know, about maybe 8 or 9 years ago. I started writing and publishing short stories. But I've always written, but it was more just a personal thing. I was teaching at Tulane. I have a PhD, and I was kind of a full-time academic for a very long time before I started trying to publish my fiction.
Oh, that's an interesting journey to move from a full-time academic to a fiction writer. Were you teaching creative writing?
No, I was not. I was actually teaching in it's now the Africana Studies program at Tulane, and I also taught in theater and dance at Tulane. So it was a totally different field. But even while I was doing that, I've always written, but it was more like a private vocation, something I just liked to do. But I was working in a totally different field for the most part.
Right. Well, that explains all of your literary references and the historical references and the metaphors in your writing. And so let's get into the book, The Talented Ripkns. I see you begin, at the beginning of the book, you have a quote from W.E.B. Du Bois. Now, the training of men is a difficult and intricate task. Its technique is a matter for educational experts, but its object is for the vision of seers.
Yeah, I like that quote. I've always liked that quote. But I used to teach the essay, The Talented Tenth, at Tulane. And to a certain extent, the novel is sort of my, it's not really about the essay so much as the responses that I would get in classes very much affected my thinking about the book. So it's inspired by the essay, and it's also inspired by how the essay is received by various different people. And then a lot of the book does have to do with educating. There's a character in it, the 13-year-old girl, and she's meeting all of her different family members, and they all have advice for her about how to live a good life and to be, a respectable person and a responsible person. And they all say actually very contradictory things. But that's really trying to figure out how to educate someone to navigate and negotiate the world is a big part of what the book is about ultimately. It was interesting transitioning from academia to writing fiction because it's very much informed by a lot of the research I did, but there's such different types of writing, or even they're different ways of thinking about essays and stuff like that. So I have all this knowledge, and then I feel like I tried to forget it, like consciously a little bit, so that my imagination would be a little bit freer. It's not always easy to go from one style of expressing yourself to another. So that was part of, I think, what happened with me.
Well, that must have been something that you had within you all along. I mean, I think about the movement from writing the dissertation even to academic writing as a transition. Right. And, I have not been able to make that leap into fiction, maybe memoir, creative nonfiction, but that leap into fiction is even more challenging. In fact, I find it easier to do something like poetry than fiction.
Yeah, they're very different. They're very, very different. And I think it's true. I think for a really long time, it just didn't seem practical. Like, I think I was trying to be practical in terms of my decisions about jobs and careers, but it's true that I always wrote fiction. I have always enjoyed it since I was a young child. And so I did always have that as sort of something else that I was doing the whole time while I was doing very, very different things.
Right. Who are the people who you were reading? What has informed your writing life, the fiction writers?
Well, the first person that always comes up is Toni Morrison.
Yes.
And she was actually my thesis advisor in college.
Really?
And yeah. Yeah.
Oh, wow. What a treat.
Yeah, no, it was amazing. It was amazing. And it's a big part of why I wanted to go to that school. I was just such a huge fan of her work because I had never read anything like that in high school or anything. And so when I read her, I was just really moved and inspired. And so that was a really amazing experience for me. And definitely, at the time when I was in high school, I wrote a lot of poetry. So it was in working with her that I actually first began writing fiction.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay. So part of what you do is that you have a lot of themes in this book around activism, politics, and class. Were those conscious decisions that you made? I mean, why did you want to tell this kind of story? And of course, was interesting too is that you use the elements of speculative fiction in telling this story.
Yeah, I'm happy that people seem to, understand and what I was trying to do with it. But because there is a lot going on in the book, and I think that it really represents sort of the merger of a lot of things that I was thinking about and feeling at the time when I wrote it. And I always relate it back to my grandfather, who really was the inspiration for the main character. So in ways that I don't know if they're immediately apparent, but they are to me. The book is really about my relationship with my grandfather and sort of how he related to ideas of class like a Black middle class, and also the value that they placed on education, because I was always taught that that was like the one thing no one could ever take away from you. That's actually what my grandparents would tell me all the time. Like, that's the one thing no one can take away from you is what you have in your head. So education was really, really important to them. And so that's sort of the baseline for me in terms of all the other themes that come out of that is sort of thinking about what that means. And of course, it doesn't, like I say about the book, there's a difference between talent and vision. So that's another thing that's going on, like just to acquire knowledge, but then it's like, what do you do with it? And trying to figure that out. So I did all the other themes sort of grew out of that, and really me thinking about what my grandfather meant to me.
Okay, so your grandfather, who's Johnny, is really a paradoxical character in this book.
Right.
Very, very complicated man. When I read this, I kept thinking about John Oliver Killens, who talks about the writer's social responsibility to his or her reader, and even somewhat a moral responsibility. Is that something that was in the back of your mind as you were developing these characters?
The writer specifically and their social responsibility. I think so. I think that, as I said, it took a long time for me to say I want to write and to actually, send my work out and try to get my work published. And I think ultimately it's like a responsibility to express yourself and to be true to your beliefs and to believe in your own voice. And that kind of is related to the idea of a moral responsibility. It's a responsibility to sort of speak and to be honest and to speak the truth. And I think that is something else that comes out a lot in the book. So, yeah, and that is kind of a moral responsibility. One of the last things that character, Johnny, says to his niece is that she has to not hide because someone needs to see her example. And she says, well, how do you know? And he says, because someone always needs to see your example. And that's when I talk about Toni Morrison or people that really inspired me when I was younger. That's definitely true. I needed to see that. I needed to read Toni Morrison. So that I think about responsibility a lot in terms of that, to expressing yourself and being honest and true to yourself.
Right.
That sounds very, I don't mean it in like a selfish way. It does sound kind of selfish, but I do think it is related to the idea of a moral responsibility to a larger community.
I would not call that selfish. I mean, the idea of telling the truth. And I was thinking also of the social responsibility that you have in conveying a message and talking about community and what Black people as a whole have to their community. Because of course that comes out in your justice committee, your justice group that plays out in this book. It felt like that was also part of what you wanted to convey, that we not only have a moral responsibility to tell the truth, but there's a social responsibility that we have as Black people in America to effect change, to do something to ensure the survival of Black people.
Right. No, I definitely think, that's like an expansion of what I mean by speaking the truth. I think that's very true and very real, and that's part of the connection with that essay, just thinking about what it means to designate a leadership class, and and sort of the limitations of thinking in that way, but that was part of why all these things sort of came together in my mind, because I do think it's like that. There's no inborn leadership class. It's like everybody has a voice, and everybody deserves to be heard and respected. And sometimes you have to respect yourself, even when other people don't show you respect. So yeah, it's all kind of related. And that's, I think, part of what the character learns, is that sometimes vision for the future comes from places that he wasn't looking for them to come from. A lot of people weren't looking for this to be where the vision for the future could come, but that's the thing about the difference between talent and vision. So he learned. And also there's a theme with the Justice Committee of you can't know everything. One person can't know everything. So all these other voices around him are actually really important, even when they don't agree all the time. They're actually important to hear, because you learn from them and you grow through them. So that's part of what was going on with the.
Right. There's so many themes going on. How long did it take you to write this book, this novel?
It took about. Well, I published because I wrote short stories before, and actually the first chapter of this book was a short story. I published it as a short story, and I think I wrote out a draft of it. It took about 2 years. I just expanded it, and then it took about the same amount of time to edit it. So I was like revising it and rewriting it for almost 2 years. So the whole thing was about 4 years to write.
We can see it was definitely worth it. What were the highlights for you in writing this book and telling this story?
The highlights? Do you mean the parts I enjoyed the most?
Right, that was a really highlight. I'm asking you about the highlights and then the challenges.
Well, I feel like I learned a lot about writing a novel through doing it. Like all kinds of things people had tried to explain to me didn't really make sense until I sat down and actually tried to do it. So that was, I don't know, that was very gratifying in and of itself. I actually enjoyed editing it a lot. One thing, I really spent a lot of time on the dialogue and just thinking about different characters' voices and trying to make them as distinct as possible. That was also very gratifying. I think that when I'm saying I learned a lot about writing a novel, it had to do with plot, the idea of plot and forward momentum, just all the basic sort of mechanical things that come up when you're trying to tell a sustained story that goes over 300 pages. All of that I did not really know very much about it all before I started writing it. So it was challenging, but it was also really exciting to sort of start to understand how these things work together, and it was very gratifying for me. I actually really enjoyed writing it, pretty much the whole thing. So.
Okay, so part of what in looking at your biography, you also really were part of a number of writers' centers and residencies, and part of what challenges for writers of color is to find places where you really feel that your writing can flourish and grow, where you get the kind of support. What would you say about the status of writers' retreats and colonies, and how valuable they are for you? Or how they were for you?
How valuable they are. I have done a lot, and it's always valuable for me, again, because I have 3 children, and my life is very loud, so I really just need to get away. It's really important, too, I think, to have a place where, writing itself is respected and valued. So that, in that sense, I appreciate just being with other people that are trying to create art. It's just nice to get away from that, because that's not always what I am around, and I'm sure that's true of a lot of people. my experiences, I have gone to a lot of different residencies and retreats, and they've all been very, very different. Yeah, I don't know. They've been so different, I don't really know how to
Right. Well,
answer that.
yeah. Part of my motivation for writing that is that I've only been to actually two writers' retreats, and usually, as the only person of color, I have not felt I could work on my own writing, but I didn't feel I was getting the kind of support that I really could get because there's still this anomaly being
Right.
and so part of what we advocate for the Center for Black Literature is to provide writing spaces for writers of color, particularly Black writers,
No,
where they have other people who have a similar background and similar experiences, so you don't feel like you're on the margins or out of alongside looking in, or people aren't looking at you as the Black writer. I mean, I found
right.
that was something that I experienced, and I was wondering if that was something you've experienced.
Yeah, it definitely is something that I've experienced, and I especially appreciated the opportunities I've had to be in spaces where I felt more sort of understood, and it's not just what I was writing about, but a lot of times for me it's who I was thinking about, like who I was writing for. When I conceived the work. So yeah, and I for example, one of the very first places I went to a workshop was Hurston Wright, the Hurston Wright Writers Week, and that was really, really wonderful and extremely supportive. And so it was a little jarring because that was one of the first ones that I attended. I don't think I realized how rare opportunities like that actually are, because it is true. It is true. It's interesting because a lot of the academic work that I did was actually about the performance of race, and it's just as true in a writing workshop as it is anywhere else. But there are a lot of expectations that people have in terms of sort of what you are writing about and who you are, and they certainly are. It's the same as any other sort of public space, but it is really nice and really important, I think, to find those few spaces that exist where you can really connect with other Black writers and writers of color. Those have all been really, really important to me in the long term.
Right.
I think, again, because I started, I didn't go, I was much older when I started writing fiction, so I wasn't really looking for support. Again, but I do appreciate that. So for me, it's just like I need time to be able to write and focus, and if this is what I get, I'm going to not let anybody else waste it. I'm going to, you know what I mean? I'm going to use it. But the things that have really been long-term sustaining, in general, those have been the places where I did not feel like that and where I was able to connect with the other people around me. I do think that's really important to find.
So I would imagine that you would say that we do need to continue to have National Black Writers Conferences.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
because there are some people
absolutely.
saying our world is so diverse. Do we really need that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't know. It is very diverse numerically, but yeah, I definitely would still perceive a need for spaces like that. It's very difficult. I can tell you part of the reason why it was so gratifying that people actually understood this book was the number of times that I was told that it was just really confusing and that no one would get. There are a lot of cultural references in here that are very specific, and I was told many times that no one would understand them. Not no one, but that mainstream, the public would not understand them. People don't even know who W.B. Du Bois is, And it's a bit demoralizing to hear that, and I know a lot of people hear that. So no, I definitely think that you still need spaces to, again, value and appreciate your own voice, and you don't always need to change it to sort of you don't always need to make adjustments to other people's limited understandings of things. So no, I there definitely is still a need for a space where it's okay to have your own culture and your own cultural references, and not feel the need to justify them, which I think is what happens a lot of the times.
Well, believe it or not, we are at the end. That is a wonderful way to, I think, close our conversation, because we've seen the whole trajectory from becoming an academic to a fiction writer to the need to have your spaces, which is part of what we do at the Center for Black Literature. We try to address those needs. So I really want to thank you for talking with me today and sharing your story, which is a unique story, and for writing The Talented Ripkns. I'm going to go back and read W.B. Du Bois's essay. And yeah, I have to go back and read it. And I want to encourage our listening audience to pick up this book. It's a wonderful read. It's just well documented with those cultural references. It's inspiring. It's motivational. And it's engaging. So The Talented Ripkns.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. We've been listening to Writers on Writing with your host, Dr. Brenda Green. I want to thank my engineer, Fritz Richardson, and want to remind you that the writer is always reading, the reader is always writing. Keep reading and writing. Inspire yourselves as readers and writers, and empower yourselves also. Write to me at writers@mec.cuny.edu, and come back next week. Thank you.
Next song was inspired by a poem.